Wednesday evening, everyone. You are watching Montgomery County Republican Club and Maryland GOP's Direct Line Show with our special guest, U.S. Congressional candidate from Maryland District 6, Matthew Foldi. Our hosts tonight are Mark Hunkerford and Jackie Saxton. Take it away.
Him saying good afternoon always never ceases to freak me out. I just always jump a little bit.
Jackie, this is the most caffeinated moment of the entire week is when
I don't even need
does that announcement. It's just it's like, I don't know. But go ahead.
All right. Well, we're super excited to have Matthew on with us tonight. I know both of us have known him, actually Mark and Dwight, longer than I have. I've met Matthew through Young Republicans. So thank you so much for joining us and welcome to the show.
Well, I love doing any podcast that Dwight does.
So I guess we'll start with the easy question, which is, why are you running for Congress? What made you decide to jump into it?
That's the question of the evening. So look, 2022 obviously is an incredibly consequential year. And thanks to Governor Hogan's leadership, we have a toss-up district right here in Western Maryland, stretching down to Montgomery County, where I've spent my entire life. And to me, as a Republican primary voter, as the former president of Montgomery County Young Republicans and now current vice president working under Jackie, I've heard everyone who's running in this district on multiple occasions. And I think they're all terrific people. Believe me, it's no walk in the park running for Congress. But in the course of my day job, which was working as a reporter at the Washington Free Beacon, I was doing a series of stories on how elected Democrats in both Washington, D.C. and in constituent serving taxpayer-funded offices in their districts were closed and locked to the public. So in the course of doing my reporting on this, I drove to a bunch of Maryland Democrats' offices, Ben Cardin, Jamie Raskin, Chris Van Hollen, and of course, David Trone. And I realized, all of David Trone's offices in the district are closed and locked. And especially in Hagerstown, you walk in the building and you're greeted by a pile of mail flowing out of his inbox because he simply doesn't care. And I've gone multiple occasions and that mail still sits there unread. So I felt like this is ridiculous, right? I mean, this is absolutely ignoring serious problems from constituents. And furthermore, none of the Republicans in the race were actually really talking about Trone. And Mark did an article this week in the Duckpin that pointed out something I hadn't realized, which was that the other candidates in the race don't even mention David Trone. So we have an R+1 district, which means this is now a Republican-friendly district in what we all know is going to be a red wave. And to me, I felt like there wasn't really a sense of urgency on behalf of a lot of the candidates. So I waited until the last day possible and then said, all right, I'm going to do this myself. So here we are.
So that's a key point, is you waited to the very last minute in terms of when you could file as a candidate. Does that give you enough time to run to put together a competitive campaign?
Well, that's what we're going to find out. But I think the answer is yes. So I had about 90 days from filing to put together this primary. And the fortunate thing for me is I'm not coming into this race new to Maryland politics, right? If I hadn't been doing Maryland politics since 2012, then this would be a fool's errand. But my hope is that people who I know, both in this district and elsewhere around the states, who I know through when I was volunteering on campaigns starting in high school in Rockville, who I know through doing college Republicans when I was in Illinois and they were running it in Maryland, who I know through young Republicans in Maryland, like Jackie, will be able to give me the leg up on what is, in my estimation, a completely wide open and undefined primary field. So we have 76 days to go, and I think it'll be a marathon that I'm sprinting the entire way. But so far, I like how the way things are going.
And to Mark's point, you're working on a condensed timeline compared to some of the other candidates who've been in the race for months now. And you've made this for your full-time job, right? So that's giving you more time to work with. So can you talk a little bit about what it was like to hand in that resignation letter to the Free Beacon? Obviously, I mean, journalists do it for passion because they're certainly not doing it for money.
That's true. And I loved working at the Free Beacon, which I did since about the start of the Biden administration. And I was just story after story exposing Democrats' corruption, fraud, lies, you name it, on a national level, on a state level, on a local level, covering Board of Education, covering Senate races, House races, presidential stuff. And so it was definitely, it was a bit sad to have to hand in my resignation in order to run for Congress. But that's how strongly I believe that we need someone who will actually focus on the primary, but more importantly, focus on the voters of Western Maryland, right? Because we know that David Trone and Democrats have left everyone northwest of basically Potomac, where he lives outside of the district, completely behind. And especially once you get past Frederick, you know, people in Western Maryland know that Democrats don't care about them and don't listen to them. And David Trone personifies this by locking them out of the government. If they even want to reach him, they can't. And it's actually incredibly insulting when you go to his office. Again, for example, in Washington County, it says, our office is closed due to the coronavirus, mail piled up, overflowing. And then it says, if you want to reach us, go to our Gaithersburg office, which is 90 minutes if you're driving the speed limit with no traffic. And the Gaithersburg office is also closed. So you get sent on a wild goose chase by David Trone, because the point that I'm making during the course of this campaign is that he's a part-time congressman, because he doesn't care about representing Western Maryland. He cares about running his multi-billion-dollar business.
And can you talk a little bit about that multi-million-dollar business? I know, because I told you earlier, I sent my dad the article today, one of the articles that came out about your race. And he goes, oh, I didn't know this guy runs Total Wine.
Yeah, so my problem is not really with Total Wine. My problem is with David Trone. And the problem with David Trone is that he's focused entirely on running Total Wine. The full name, of course, is Total Wine and More. And my contention is that with David Trone, what you get is more taxes, more spending, more crime, more inflation. So the problem there is not the company, although as over the course of the campaign, I will talk about how David Trone right now is being sued for age-based discrimination as a result of the way that Total Wine is run. But my problem more is that that's what David Trone cares about. He doesn't care about any of the issues facing our country. David Trone is a zero-issue congressman, because at the end of the day, none of the issues that matter to voters in this district are on his priority. You could write to David Trone right now and mail it to his district office nearest to you, and it will sit there unread, because there are no issues that concern him other than running his business.
Well, let's go back and talk a little bit about it. I know with a little of the history about sort of the legal scrapes, both criminal and regulatory, that Trone has gotten into over the years. It's how shall I say, a very impressive list.
Yeah.
It would keep a lawyer very busy for a long period of trying to keep Trone out of jail.
I was going to say it would keep someone very busy who wants to sit and read through it all.
Right.
Yes.
Could you go through some of the background on that?
Well, honestly, I'm going to put my former journalist hat on, and I'll ask you to go through your own reporting on this, because to my frustration, a lot of the, I'll give an anecdote, and then Mark, I mean, you actually have done more public facing reporting. I have stuff that I'm going to work on putting out as well. But just to give you an example, I was in Allegheny County on Friday, and I started my remarks by saying, does anyone here know that David Trone has been arrested multiple times? No one. Does anyone know that David Trone is currently being sued in the state of Maryland? No. And so to me, as a Republican primary voter and as someone who worked at the House Republican Super PAC, I know that a lot of the work to define Democrats needs to be done by Republican candidates, right? We all know that the Washington Post is not going to do the reporting on David Trone that Mark did in the duck pen. I actually sent some of Mark's earlier articles even before I filed, when I was still pointing out to people, hey, we're on the verge of picking up this seat via Hogan's successful fight against Annapolis Democrats. And no one had any idea about this. No one has made that case against Trone since Ami Hober in 2018, and as well as since Raskin in 2016. So to me, that was why I wanted to run, is, look, I've been defeating Democrats as a profession, and we need to make the case against David Trone, because, again, we know the Washington Post is not going to do the reporting that Mark did. So I'll actually hand it to you.
I was going to say, actually, what's interesting is that a lot of it was done when he was running in a different congressional district, when he was running in District 8. Potomac is very conveniently divided, so you can go either way, I guess, at least in the last go-round. And it was Jamie Raskin in his successful primary against Trone that Trone outspent the entire field. And yet I think because of Raskin's highlighting of this experience, of this record, that Trone ended up losing that primary.
David Trone is literally the biggest loser in terms of money spent in House history when he lost to Raskin. And my theory of the media, having worked as a conservative reporter, is that the only time Democrats are ever hit by mainstream publications, by liberal publications, is at the behest of another Democrat. And that's proof positive of this, because you're right, the Bethesda Beat did incredible reporting about David Trone in 2016 when he was running against Jamie Raskin, and then it fell off.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong here, because I still consider myself pretty new to this, but Trone can't vote in this district, right? Because you just mentioned he ran in 8. Now he's running in 6.
Yeah, David Trone has not voted for himself in 6 years.
Right. So, and I did learn that
David Trone is such a bad congressman that David Trone does not vote for him.
Yeah. And I did learn that, you don't have to live in your congressional district to run in that congressional district, but it is frowned upon, right, Mark?
Well, yeah, no, it's particularly because of the constitutional requirement. It is it's not possible for states to add additional ones. But it's interesting. I'm curious on some of the news. You don't have to tip your hand cut yet, but can we talk about some of the more recent developments in the sort of Trone's sort of business problems? I was kind of intrigued by them.
Can you just first give us the quick rundown?
Sure, I will. I'll give it. I mean, this goes back to in 1989. There's history of him being arrested. He was arrested with 23 criminal counts, including 9 counts of tampering with public records, 4 counts of criminal solicitation, 4 counts of operating a corrupt organization, 2 counts of perjury, and 1 count of conspiracy. And this all had to do with sort of unlawful and deceptive business practices. Now, ultimately, after long litigation, he was able to overcome this, but he was part of what he ended up having to agree to was a $40,000 fine. I think with the history, if you stop there, you might want to say, well, this was a regulatory scrape at the very beginning, but there have been subsequent arrests and also subsequent findings by regulatory agencies. And what I found fascinating was I think in Minnesota, where they concluded that Trone's disrespect for law was kind of significant, and they went through kind of his history of, basically saying that anybody could get indicted, or $1 million fine in New Jersey, your home state, Jackie, was insignificant, and the reason for that was because he could afford to pay it. So you've got this kind of long history of issues that he's run into, although I gather there's some more recent stuff.
Yeah. And to Trone's residency, to me, the problem is not that Trone can't vote for himself. It's that he doesn't vote for Western Maryland, right? I mean, he literally does not work. He votes via proxy, which means literally giving his vote away to another Democrat. David Trone lives 20 minutes from the Capitol, right? And yet he can't even show up to do the work. He cares about it that little. So to me, that's the indictment. Sure, it's funny that he lives and votes for Jamie Raskin, but the problem is more that if you're living in Cumberland, if you're living in Oakland, if you're living in Accident, if you're living in Hagerstown, if you're living in Gaithersburg, if you're living in Germantown, if you're living in Urbana, if you're living in Frederick, your representative doesn't care about you enough to show up to do the work that you pay him for.
Right. So let's address, I guess, what a lot of people who are watching this would consider the big elephant in the room or on the camera. You're 25 years old, and you have a lot of older people probably thinking, man, this guy, he's a child. He doesn't know. He's not qualified. So how would you refute that? I mean, as you mentioned, you've been involved in CRs, you've been in YRs, and if I'm not mistaken, you've held elected office before. So can you talk a little bit about your qualifications for running for this position?
I think specifically with being 25, that's actually in my brief stint so far on the campaign trail. It's a huge asset because right now I and people who are, supporting me are literally fighting for our future. And that is important. It's important contrast to draw, not necessarily just with David Trone, but also with the octogenarian Democrats who are running this country right now, right? Joe Biden has no idea how much gas costs. Nancy Pelosi, same thing, right? We saw the Secretary of Energy, who's I've exposed repeatedly as a journalist. I look forward to making a stronger case against as a member of Congress. She makes a strong push for electric vehicles. This week, she showed she didn't even know how to charge an electric vehicle. So the people who are running this country have absolutely no connection to the problems that people my age, people twice my age, people 3 times my age are facing. So the fact that I am 25, it's unmistakable. I know I could probably identify as a 66-year-old like David Trone, but the problem for me is that we have people running the country who are completely disconnected from the problems that both people my age face and also people, twice my age face. And Jackie, you're right. Also, yes, this is not exactly my first rodeo, right? When I was in college in Chicago, the Chicago GOP, which does exist, reached out to me and heavily recruited me to run for office in Chicago back when I was 19. I mean, I'm old now compared to that. And so they said, we need you to run to be ward committee man in Chicago. And this is 2016. And this is before election integrity was a huge, huge priority for a lot of Republican primary voters. And they said, look, we need a Republican to be an actual Republican like yourself to be ward committee man in the south side of Chicago now. Why is that? The main role of committee men is to appoint election judges. And you need to boot Democratic election judges and you need to appoint Republican election judges when you're living and representing a ward on the south side of Chicago where, more people will vote than who are registered and living. And we had a cemetery in my ward, and every 2 years, Democrats go do their voter registration drive in the cemetery, dig them up, roll them out to the polls, put them back down. So, and the Democrats put up a fake opponent against me. They were so concerned that I would actually fight to have people's votes count and fight to have election judges there who are not just going to green light rampant voter fraud. And we looked at my opponent and her signatures were entirely fraudulent. It was one of the worst cases of ballot access forgery the Illinois GOP lawyers had ever seen. So we took her to court. Unlike David Trone, that's the only court case my name appears on. And we said to her, you have a very simple option. You can fight this case and probably go to jail, or you can drop out of the race. So I ended up winning that election uncontested, which let me tell you is much more fun and much easier than running in contested elections. But elections are important, and it's good to have competition.
And that was, correct me if I'm wrong, either directly the Barack Obama home ward or pretty close to it, down where the University of Chicago is.
It was, I think he was one block outside of the ward.
One block outside.
He worked, when he was on Chicago, he would have been my constituent. I don't think he would have voted for me, though.
I'd be
Probably he couldn't have because he's not registered as a Republican,
True.
Right?
Yeah.
Yes.
I'd be remiss if I didn't mention my 7 degrees to Kevin Bacon or whatever what they call it with Matt. And the first time that I met him was at Dwight's Pizza and Politics event. And we were sitting and we were talking. We found out that his successor for U Chicago CRs was a friend of mine from middle and high school, Brett Barbin, who's now working on Republican campaigns in New Jersey.
So I go back a little farther. Back to 2012, down at the Republican convention in Tampa. So Matt, you might want to explain how did you end up at? I can do the math, and so can everybody else. 10 years ago at a Republican convention.
look, you guys are really making it seem like at 25, I'm actually very old. So you're right.
Believe me, you'll feel older by primary day, but go for it, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna lose a lot of this hair that
Yes.
I have. Yeah, I met
Hopefully, it
Dwight
won't trim
almost.
the color of my hair. But go ahead, talk about
That's true.
Tampa.
I first met Dwight almost exactly 10 years ago in Tampa at the Maryland Republican Party delegation breakfast, and he walked up to me and he said, "Dwight, you wanna jump in here?"
Sure. Basically, I said, "Hey, cool cufflinks."
Yeah.
He had R2D2 and Darth Vader, if I'm not mistaken, cufflinks. The
Oh, and
Lego
it's
ones.
Star Wars.
And today
Day
is Star
today.
Wars Day, so it's
Yes,
it's
it
perfect.
is.
So yes,
Yeah,
that
it's
was
like
how
me
that
too.
was my first introduction to Maryland GOP politics, and then right after that convention, I came back, and Larry Lesser, Dwight, Mark, Michael Higgs, and others were instrumental in convincing me to spend my evenings at MCGOP HQ or door knocking instead of doing homework, but turned out okay because I managed to
I never said that.
graduate high school. Yeah, well, Dwight will always point out that, I would skip
Yeah.
soccer practice. I forgot I was talking with this woman whose congressional campaign I helped out on in 2014, Nancy Hoyt, out further east of us, who was running against Donna Edwards. And I asked her, I'm rolling out endorsements for my campaign starting next week. And I said, Nancy, I'd love to have you endorse my congressional race. And she said, I'm so excited to see that you're running 8 years after we worked on my race together. And she said, look, you are the hardest working Republican I know. And I pushed back on that. I actually think the people on this call work much harder than I do. But I said, and she said, yeah, I will never forget that you were going to skip your own prom to come to a random campaign event of mine. And your mom called me and said, no, he will go to prom. So, that was one instance where I did actually do my normal high school thing. But a lot of my high school years were spent before we had a teenage Republican club that Ryan started after I was in college. It was just me and the Montgomery County YRs, led by Evan, our good friend Evan Young at the time, going out and door knocking for an amazing amount of great candidates. And one of them, Jim Shalek, obviously is.
And that's why you were Man of the Year, too, for the... Don't forget your MD-GOP's Man of the Year.
And he said you were Man of the Year that year.
You were Youth of the Year for the Youth of the Year, not Man. Youth of the Year.
I was totally shocked. My first year of college, I flew back here and to go to Ocean City, where we're all going to be this weekend for the Maryland GOP convention. But I flew out just because I thought it would be fun to be at a MD GOP convention. I had no clue that I was going to be the Maryland Young Republican of the Year in 2014. And that was a couple of months after I was awarded the Montgomery County Young Republican of the Year. And something that Dwight was reminding me of earlier was obviously I've been working on Republican campaigns in the 6th Congressional District, going back to Roscoe Bartlett in 2012 when they drew him out. But I actually flew out to moderate a Republican primary debate for the 6th Congressional District when I was in college. Dwight asked me, hey, would you like to moderate this debate? And I said, I'm in Chicago right now, but if you're asking me to fly out on a weekday to go moderate a congressional debate, the answer is yes, I'll be there. So it'll be interesting. I'm going to do a couple of candidate forums in the coming months. And the last time I was actually the one asking the questions. This time I'll be the one answering the questions for the voters.
We'll see which part is easier for you. Now, when you were at the University of Chicago, one of the things you were involved with, obviously you were deeply involved with the college Republicans while you were there, but you also were very active in the effort to promote free speech on campus, which is an issue that a lot of people are very concerned. A lot of conservatives are very concerned about. But I think it's kind of a great example of kind of the leadership you've shown on issues that really matter to folks. You might want to elaborate on the group. Again, it wasn't a partisan group, but it was a group that focused on encouraging speech on campus.
You're right. While most of my career has been dedicated to electing Republicans, this was an important nonpartisan cause that I worked on extensively in college as an activist, and then I continued working on as a reporter. And at the time, we all knew in the back of our minds that K through 12 was a problem. But this was back when Berkeley was setting itself on fire, or I should say Antifa and left-wing activists were setting Berkeley on fire. But I was at the University of Chicago, which is one of the few colleges in the world where free speech is actually valued. And that was very important for me as a student. And so they gave me a tremendous opportunity to invite students from around the country to have the first ever, as far as I know, student-led, student-run conference on free expression. And then from that, we started an organization called Students for Free Expression, go figure, where we pushed schools and student governments and student administrators and school administrators around the country to adopt, basically copy and paste. In this case, academic plagiarism is acceptable, to adopt the University of Chicago's statements and principles on free speech. Now, that led to a lot of cool things. I got the Foundation of Individual Rights in Education, which is better known as FIRE. They gave me their most prestigious award called the Prometheus Society, because Prometheus, had fire. It's a pun. They're very clever. Right. And what was sort of shocking and crazy to me was one day I was actually, in a rarity, I was doing homework, and I got an email from the office of the Speaker of the House of Wisconsin. And they said, "Hey, Matthew, we saw the free speech conference that you did in Chicago. We'd love for you to testify in our legislature about the importance of free speech." And I emailed them. I said, I'm shocked. You are next to University of Madison. You've got no one. They said, right. There are students there who support free speech, but they're, either not willing to testify about it out of fear of social repercussions or otherwise unavailable. I didn't get it. So my grandma and I drove up to Madison, and then I testified to say the obvious. Free speech is incredibly important. And I was not there wearing my Republican elected official hat, or my college Republican hat, or anything like that. I was wearing my concerned American citizen hat, which is the most important hat to wear. And I said, look, regardless of what you believe, you should go to college to learn and not be indoctrinated. And unfortunately, I don't even think that bill passed, because the Democratic Party already at that time was incredibly hostile to the thought of hearing dissenting viewpoints. And so fast forward to my role as a journalist, the stories that, generally speaking, the stories I loved the most were talking to normal people and helping them change their community. And a lot of that, as we now know, has come through education and through parental involvement in education. And so, for example, one of the stories that I loved working on the most was in Hamilton County, Indiana, which is suburban, exurban Indianapolis. This is an R+30 county, okay? And a parent reached out to me and said, "Hey, you would not believe what my third grader's school is sending out." And so, I did a couple of stories on this. And then he reached out to me a couple months later and he said, "Hey, I'm actually running for Board of Ed now." And so, he's working to change his community. And another story that I did was a professor reached out to me at the University of Memphis. He said, "Hey, is it a story if my school is going to give grants to professors to incorporate the school's social justice principles into curricula?" He said, "Look, I'm an econ professor. There is numbers here. There is no social justice. There is just econ." And this a state school in Tennessee is basically bribing professors to change their curricula. So I reached out to the governor of Tennessee's office. I said, "Hey, are you guys aware that this is happening? This strikes me as sort of crazy, especially to be happening in a state like Tennessee." They said, "Give us a couple days. We'll sort of see what's going on here." So I did a follow-up story. That program was canceled. Governor stepped in and said, "I don't know how this happened on my watch, basically, but this is not going to happen anymore." So we've seen that college free speech has been an issue for as long as all of us have been alive, obviously, as has K through 12 education. But unfortunately, it took the coronavirus for parents to realize that their kids are being straight up indoctrinated in hating, in essence, America and the West, starting as young as 4 years old. And so now a lot of the shift has turned much more to K through 12, which I think is a long time coming. But there's a lot more work that needs to be done. I was at an event last night in Montgomery County full of parents, a lot of whom were endorsing my campaign after it was over, which was great. You can check out my Twitter. I posted one of the videos today, and my Facebook. But parents are going to, this year, I think, fight back against the Biden administration. Because remember, if you are a parent concerned that your child is being taught that there's no such thing as gender, or that your child is being taught that advanced math is racist, or if your child is being taught that because of the color of their skin, they're inherently stupid or evil. The Biden administration views you as a domestic terrorist. And I think parents across the country are saying, not so much, not on my watch. And we saw that in Virginia, obviously, very prominently with Glenn Youngkin winning. But we also saw this in Jackie's native New Jersey, where Republicans did astonishingly better than, the expert prognosticators who are all liberal journalists consumed by groupthink would have thought possible.
That one was a nail biter. I think we would be remiss if we didn't at least spend a little bit of time talking about policy and the kinds of things that you would be working on as a member of Congress. So let's start with, I guess we'll reference your lapel pin there. You are Jewish.
Yes.
And Israel, I'm sure, is something that matters very much to you. And I know a little bit about your family and your mom and your aunt, who is running for Knesset, I believe, right? So let's talk a little soon. So let's talk a little bit about foreign policy, and we'll start there.
Well, I mean, look at any region of the world, and it's less safer starting the minute that Biden took office, and really being jump-started, obviously, by Afghanistan, but also obviously with Ukraine, glorifying China and its genocide Olympics on a world stage, and racing to do as much as possible to give Iran nuclear weapons, which will, of course, destabilize the entire Middle East. So when my sort of quip about the Biden administration's foreign policy that I always use when I'm on Maria Bartiromo's show really early in the morning, I can just rely on it. It's always front of mind for me, is the Biden administration is racing to win the Guinness Book of World Records for most countries lost in the shortest amount of time. And the fact that Ukraine is still a country is despite Biden, not because of Biden. Obviously, Afghanistan fell. And I think that China, when it saw that happen, just was salivating at the thoughts, knowing that it can swoop in, take Taiwan with no problem. Iran watched that, salivating, knowing that it can pursue nuclear weapons, right? Russia, as it invaded Ukraine, remember, the administration hates American energy and hates American energy creators and hates American jobs so much that it was funding the Russian war machine, buying Russian oil, while it was calling Putin a war criminal, right? Meanwhile, in Vienna, the Biden administration also said to Putin, hey, we're greenlighting you to negotiate an Iran deal on behalf of the United States of America. So Biden said that Putin is a war criminal. Meanwhile, he's buying Russian oil by the millions of barrels because he hates the thought of American energy independence, because he needs to appease his radical leftist base. And he's saying to Putin, oh yeah, have your guy in Vienna also negotiate on behalf of the United States a deal to give Iran nuclear weapons. So every region of the world under the Biden administration is less safe than it was under the Trump administration. And I think part of this ties back to the reporting I did at the Free Beacon, which is that our government is being run on a part-time basis. One of the things that I exposed was, for example, the Senate Armed Service Committee Democrats, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee Democrats, all through the Iran deal, all through Afghanistan, all through Ukraine, all through Russia invading, all through China and the Chinese Olympics, we're meeting remote. And this means one of two things happens. One is classified information is not discussed, so they can't actually plan to solve the problems that the Biden administration's weakness is creating. Or classified information is being discussed in a non-secure fashion over Zoom, which is slightly more secure than this streaming service that we're using right now. But we probably shouldn't be broadcasting on this live stream our plans to, stop Iran's nuclear program right now. So all of these problems happened as the administration's hands were tied because Democrats want to live in this world of permanent remote everything.
So the inflation, stagflation, the economy has been an issue of considerable import, and probably even more so today with Federal Reserve acting. Can you elaborate a little bit about what you're talking about what can be done? What can a Congress do that would address some of these economic challenges?
And I'll just say one final thing on the Israel question specifically. This is a pan from the Hogan admin. This is my mom led the work to establish the Maryland-Israel sister state relationship. And she pointed out to Hogan's staff, look, Democrats like Jews because Jews donate money to Democrats. They do not care about us. They do not care about our votes. And so she said, look, O'Malley used Jews in Montgomery County as a piggy bank. Why don't you do something tangible and meaningful to deepen and connect Maryland with Israel. So for me, I can't imagine myself not as a Jew. So, I'm unsure how much of my very steadfast support for Israel stems from the fact that I'm a Jew versus how much stems from the fact that I'm a Republican, or how much stems from the fact that I'm an American concerned about, supporting our allies. But obviously the Biden administration, like all Democratic administrations since 2015, I guess that's just two of them, but is hell-bent on giving Iran nuclear weapons. That is the only unifying strand that I found in my analysis as a reporter that ties the Democratic foreign policy together. That's why Biden was so reluctant to go strong against Putin, because if he were tough on Putin as he was invading Ukraine, that would actually jeopardize the talks happening in Vienna simultaneously to give Iran nuclear weapons. So, you look at, and all of this comes because Democrats hate Saudi Arabia because they hate oil. They hate oil wherever it comes from, but they hate oil when it comes from America above all else. So after we finally cut off buying oil from Russia, we instead said, all right, no more Russian oil. We get it. We're instead going to do Venezuelan oil. We're instead going to do Saudi oil. We're instead going to do any oil from outside of the United States. Now shifting to inflation, this is a great example of the dishonesty of Democrats, right? Because we all see inflation around us all the time. We see it when we go, particularly to get gases, but we see it when we go to the grocery store. We see it when we buy literally anything. We see it with the supply chain crisis. But the Biden administration, from the top down, said, all right, first, the inflation that you're seeing is not here, right? Don't believe your lying guys. Then they said, this is transitory. Okay, just give us a little bit. And then they said, actually, you know what? Inflation is good. This will somehow help right the supply chain crisis, and we just need to live with this. So, right, Biden is by far the worst president of my lifetime. If I had been around long enough to be as old to have seen Jimmy Carter, he probably would also be worse than Jimmy Carter. But the problem is we need to stop the other priority of the Democrats, which is trillions of dollars in unneeded and unwanted social spending. You look at the Biden administration's budget, and my colleagues at the Free Beacon did a great job going through line by line of this. It includes things like national parks equity. I mean, the priorities of this administration are no one's priorities, whether you're a Republican, Democrat, or independent. No one on earth cares about national parks equity.
Does that just mean like every park has to have the same number of trees? What does that even mean?
Well, Democrats actually have no idea how to explain any of their policies, but that's why it's important, though, that we do flip this seat in particular, right? We have no business losing this seat. This is now a Republican seat in a neutral year. This is not a neutral year, because every single way you can measure life in America is worse under unified Democratic rule. But the reason why we need to flip this seat, flip 5 seats, flip Congress, and then flip even more to have an even larger majority, as large a majority as possible, is because we need to say, look, we can't just spend trillions of dollars and think that there will be no cost to our economy. We can't just do modern monetary theory, which posits that money is fake, and therefore we can print limitless supplies and have no consequence in our economy. So if we don't take both houses of Congress back, we are just a couple of Democrats abolishing the filibuster away from the Green New Deal, from Build Back Broke actually happening, from all of the other insane priorities of the Biden administration. So the first thing to stop runaway inflation that is happening is to acknowledge that it's happening. And that's why, look, I'm 25, but unlike David Trone, unlike Biden and Pelosi, I actually pay for groceries. I actually know how much things cost, and it's skyrocketing. I actually go to the grocery store and I see, the food that I normally buy is not here. So we need to take Congress and then stop these reckless spending policies in their tracks, or we're going to become Weimar Germany, where money is so meaningless. You use dollars as wallpaper, right? I'd much rather have people use my yard signs as wallpaper than $100 bills.
But let me go back, and you described the district. It's an unusual district in configuration. I mean, most districts in the country are pretty much one party or the other. And what's really unique about District 6 is, based on the reports, Cook has it, I think, 1+D, and the other has it 1+ Republican. It's right on the margin.
Yeah.
So in order to win, whoever, winning the Republican primary, it's really going to be necessary, isn't it, to bring over a lot of independents and crossover voters. It's not a district either that a Democrat can rely on just Democratic voters to win, or Republican can win just on Republican voters. You're going to need to win this district a lot of crossover voters to be able to take on Trone successfully. What are your thoughts about how to do that?
I think that the core of my message of Trone not caring is something that appeals to you, whether you are in Garrett County, where he literally, right? I mean, I start my speeches in Western Maryland by saying, what do David Trone and Joe Biden have in common? Now, all of you have heard me answer this question, but for those in the audience, think about it. What do David Trone and Joe Biden have in common when you're sitting there in Allegheny County? Well, David Trone and Joe Biden are both multimillionaires from Pennsylvania who can't locate Western Maryland to save their lives. And so whether you are a Republican voter in Garrett County concerned about the border, concerned about crime, concerned about the opioid crisis, concerned about your economy, concerned about revitalization in your community economically, or whether you're a Democrat in Gaithersburg who works for the federal government, you understand that your so-called representative is not focused on caring about you. So whether you agree with me, whether you disagree with me, I actually will show up. That's one of the actual benefits of having worked in journalism, is you understand the importance of listening to people and hearing their stories, hearing their feedback, hearing sort of what's happening in their community. And right now, we have the worst representative in America when it comes to actually listening to voters and hearing their concerns. So whether or not a voter will agree with me on every single issue, and I don't expect anyone agrees with anyone on every single issue, at the end of the day, I can look them in the eye and say, look, I resigned my job because representing this district is a full-time job, and it should be a full-time job. David Trone, on the other hand, bailed on us so he can focus on the bottom line of Total Wine.
You know, it's interesting, and I hate to interject on this, but thinking of Montgomery County representatives of the past, both, I go back to Connie Morell. I think that she was congressman barely before you were alive, but maybe a few years. But then afterwards, Chris Van Hollen, who obviously took her seat, both were sort of legendary, well known for providing constituent service. And not surprising, with a lot of federal workers and others, there were undoubtedly a lot of complaints, or a lot of issues that could get addressed, whoever was in office at that time. That it strikes me, with David Trone's offices being shut, that's like 180 degrees away from the kind of representation that, again, both Republicans and Democrats provided in Montgomery County in the past.
Well, he's just insulting.
I know that's like there's a question in there somewhere. Maybe Jack can help me respond to that.
Well, yeah, I would say it's basically more of a where did you see, or I guess what caused this ideological shift from running for office to represent your constituents versus running for office for, power and money, I guess.
Well, that's all Trone is concerned with. And, he when he talks about the rise in oil prices, he took the DNC party line completely, which is corporate greed is the fault of high gas prices. Well, we didn't have these in the Trump administration. So why is this corporate greed allegedly now just starting when Democrats take over? I mean, David Trone is the epitome of corporate greed, right? I mean, he is literally grifting money from us. We pay his office rent in Frederick County so he can have an office in Frederick City that's papered over and locked. We pay for his office in Gaithersburg that's in a lovely building, the Washingtonian Center, lovely building. That is an expensive real estate. We pay for that. No one's been there for 2 years. We pay for his office in the government building in Washington County. We pay for his office in Allegheny County. Oh, and by the way, he doesn't even have an office in Garrett County. So to me, what changed was the coronavirus. And, you say what you will about Republicans or Democrats, but constituent service should be at the core of what you do as a representative, regardless of the partisanship, right? If a grandma has a problem with the Social Security check, you should be able to help her with that. But the problem is now, if you're a grandma who has a problem with the Social Security check, or you're someone who doesn't have easy access to internet, your only recourse is to reach out to your government on Zoom. And that's because Democrats are okay with that. They think everyone is a wealthy luxury liberal. But in reality, obviously, there are a lot of people in a lot of different socioeconomic classes who are left out of government by Zoom. So coronavirus is really what changed.
So we do have a question from the audience from Nicole Bennett, first vice chair of the MDGOP and one of our other hosts of the show. And she asked, and Dwight will pull it up, human trafficking and modern day slavery runs rampant across the globe. What is your stance on bolstering criminal penalties for traffickers?
I mean, look, we need to secure our border. We've seen that it's porous. And, the Democrats' offices are closed. David Trone's office is closed. The border is wide open. And this is what happens under unified Democratic Party rule. So if you're smuggling people, right, we just saw that Border Patrol agent drowned, saving drug smugglers. And the Biden administration persecuted Border Patrol agents over an internet hoax that their reins were actually whips. So we need to secure the border because Democrats, would have you believe that open borders are humane and this is compassionate, but it's actually the opposite. It's the opposite for both the people who are being smuggled by these drug coyotes, and it's the opposite for the people who are tasked with keeping our communities safe. So we have fentanyl pouring in from the border that is all made in China at this point that is ravaging communities in Western Maryland and Eastern Maryland and Central Maryland and outside of Maryland. And there are no consequences for any of this. So whether you're trafficking in humans, whether you are trafficking in drugs, there need to be actual consequences for breaking the law, entering our country. And we need to actually enforce the law. We need to actually support the people who are there to keep us safe, right? Literally, the Biden administration was deceived by fake news on Twitter that said that clearly by someone who's never been outside of Brooklyn in his life. And he said, oh, look, the Border Patrol agents, they're whipping these migrants.
So I hate to say that what's funny is, so that's the agency, that's the department that's going to be the, that has the board of misinformation, and yet they managed to get deceived by own misinformation on their own department activities.
And that's a great point. So, I mean, answering Cole's question, obviously not only do we need to have stiffer penalties, we need to actually have any penalties for, again, whether you're trafficking drugs or humans. And to me, the biggest irony of all with our new czar of disinformation is that she actually is a TikTok star, and TikTok is Chinese spyware. All of the stuff on her phone is completely compromised by the Chinese Communist Party. So the czar of disinformation, Nina Jankowicz, her phone is completely compromised by our adversaries. So she's so concerned about disinformation, but she's singing weird Harry Potter fan fiction. Harry Potter was like 13 years old in the books at the time. And she's doing it all on an app that gives China access to everything else that's on her phone. So, of course, Democrats are not concerned about misinformation. They are concerned about their narratives being broken. They're concerned that, right, that's why big tech colluded hand in hand with the Biden campaign and the DNC to ban the New York Post, the oldest newspaper in America, from reporting things about Hunter Biden, which it took the media 2 years to acknowledge are true. So the media is not in any way concerned with disinformation. They are concerned with truth, and truth has a bias towards Republicans.
Can I ask, just as we're reaching sort of the end of the show, so what's next for you on the campaign trail, and how can people get in touch with you?
So website, right, it'll populate there in a second, MatthewFoldi.com. Email me, MatthewAFoldi@gmail.com. Find me on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, whatever. Obviously, right now we are getting volunteers. So this week, we actually launched this campaign. And then next week, we are rolling out endorsements. I just secured my first slew of congressional Republicans to endorse my campaign. One of the things that struck me is the lack of attention paid to Maryland. Always. I remember in 2014 when Hogan was running, it was evident to everyone in the MCGOP, no, he's actually going to win. We're not, blowing smoke up people. He was going to win. And the New York Times 538 gave Hogan infamously a 6% chance winning on election day. So no one in the national sphere, conservative or liberal, ever pays attention to Maryland. I saw this when I was covering our redistricting stuff, when I was covering Hogan's anti-crime push. And so in this week, we're already bringing actual national attention to this race to unseat David Trone. We kicked things off with Mark in the duck pin on Monday, but Fox News, Daily Caller have already covered this race for the first time this entire cycle. People are learning about David Trone's run-ins with the law. They have a lot more that I'll teach them about over the course of this campaign. So please do get involved. So next week, we're going to be rolling out a lot of endorsements, also from Maryland leaders, as well as from national security or members of Congress, to really shine a spotlight on Maryland where it should be, because we're good for more than just writing checks to Republicans who come in from out of town and then fly out and don't care about the problems in Maryland or don't care about the people of Maryland. Then the week after that, May 16th, stay tuned. I actually would love to come back on later to talk about the tour, let's just say, that we're going to do of the 6th congressional district in each of the counties that week, that I think is really going to shine a light on my point of emphasizing how David Trone does not care about you or your concerns.
All right. Well, that sounds like a great place to wrap it. Matthew, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And it sounds like we're going to be seeing a lot more of you around the 6th congressional district over the next, 79 days?
76 days. Look, you'll see me around here for the rest of eternity. I'm never leaving. So it's this time I'm saying I'd love for your vote and support and to volunteer. Go to MatthewFoldi.com right below me. And look, obviously we need to get the word out. I'm well aware that we joined this race very late, but I think that was, to me, out of a sense that no one had really the urgency to win this district and save America, very low stakes, that I feel like are required, in the year 2022 to actually finally unseat Potomac millionaires who do not live in this district, who have been the only ones representing this district for the past 10 years.
All right. Well, we will be back next week with another exciting guest, another exciting interview. But for now,
A relative of mine.
A relative of yours, yeah.
2 weeks from tomorrow, this week.
All right. And I also have to say, today is also Israeli Independence Day, so shout out to that as well.
Yep. Yom Ha'atzmaut Sameach to everyone listening. Well, thanks everyone for joining. It's always a